right, so I think we can get started. So thank you so much to everyone for taking the time on a Wednesday night so close to the holidays or during the holidays, busy time of year for everyone, and joining me for this chat, this discussion with my three panelists. I am so excited to share them with you and all of the wisdom that they hold. So I would like to get started just by saying, or by just giving people some background as to why I'm even doing this in the first place and have invited you here tonight. Like I said in the beginning, I live in Bradford. I've lived here since 2007. 2007, gosh, well, my daughter, who is 15 now, we moved to Bradford when she was 1. So do the math there. So we've been here for a long time raising children, and she's 15, my middle child is 13, and my youngest is 10. So over the last 15 years, up until maybe 2 years ago, I have been neck deep in doing children related things in the town of Bradford and around. And now, not like it's gotten any easier. I'm pretty much on the road my entire life, driving them now to different activities. So, and then my other half of who I am is I am the artistic director at Catamount Arts. So I've finally found enough breathing room to start coming out into the community and attempting to share what I know, what I love with folks of the town. And so this summer, as most of you did as well, I participated in the VCRD Moving Bradford Forward series of community events. So some background on that for folks who weren't there, and for our panelists. VCRD, if you're probably familiar with them, is the Vermont Council on Rural Development. And they came down and worked with Bradford on several occasions and moved us through the process. And I will put in the chat the actual report that came out this October on what came out of all of that community work here in the town of Bradford. So moving forward together, and I'm going to read verbatim what the report says. It was Bradford community members coming together to identify and prioritize goals, foster local leadership, connect to resources, and develop and realize achievable action plans. And so a lot of work was done with a lot of help, and we came up with 3 priorities. So those 3 priorities were: number 1, to boost town capacity; number 2, to improve and expand recreation facilities and programming and build a skate park; and number 3, advance resiliency, sustainability, alternative energy, and agriculture. And like I said, I'll put that report link in the chat. So those were the priorities that came out of those meetings. And the 4th one on the list that didn't get chosen as a priority to move forward in this realm was the creative economy. There was a lot of buzz around the creative economy. And as was said over and over again during the VCRD events, even though not all of the priorities or all of the points that were championed, even though they weren't chosen as the 3 priorities, it didn't mean that we should stop, that we should continue to move forward on those goals. And so all of those goals that were brought up are also in that report. So the runner-up was the creative economy. And what I wanted to do was bring a panel of folks together for the Bradford community and beyond. I invited everyone to come, but with a focus on Bradford and an invitation to Bradford folks to come and talk to these 3 panelists that are not from here necessarily. They're not from Bradford. So they're outside of Bradford doing the work. I wanted to call them in and call all of us together to start this conversation with people who are doing this. So that's why we're here. So I don't see this as being the last one. This is the first of many events where we can bring resources together, bring folks together and have these conversations and continue to move this priority forward in our town and in other towns. So I would love to introduce our panel of speakers tonight. And first we have Geoffrey Sewake. And Geoffrey is the CEO of Whirligig Brewing. And I'll let him speak on his own behalf here in a moment. And we also have Jason Torres, who is the owner of the loading dock in Littleton, New Hampshire. And we have Jody Fried, who is the executive director of Catamount Arts. So welcome to all three of them. And thank you for taking me up on this offer, for joining us here tonight. So I want to start, and I'm going to start with some discussion that will be between the panelists and I, and then I want to open it up to everyone to talk to them. And if you have a question in the moment, just raise your hand or speak up. It's really not that, we're not gonna be too formal here. Okay, so I wanted to get started, and just so you know, none of the panelists know what I'm gonna say either. So this is really like, throwing paint at a canvas, right? We'll see what happens. I wanted to start by asking Jason, so when you think of creative economy and you think of people coming together and making it work, and I know there's been discussion in Bradford about things popping up and then things, dissipating and things popping up. And I would love to hear your perspective on the power of team when it comes to gaining momentum in cities and towns in the creative economy, and around your experience with Littleton's First Friday.
Hey everyone, I'm Jason. Thanks for having me on, Molly. This is super fun. Yeah, with the First Friday events that we had in Littleton this summer, it was really interesting to see how folks came together. Most of it seemed to be online. I mean, we were coming out of the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic, whatever, this summer. A lot of businesses and creatives and folks that were into the arts were on Instagram and sharing information, and that really actually was like a lot of the catalyst for the interest and I think the involvement in the First Friday. So we leveraged technology, which is great, and then the technology is wonderful, but you have to have like the real connections with people, and there's just a lot of kind of walking around to local businesses and having conversations one-on-one. It was just, we were just coming out of the pandemic, so we were just being able to like sort of do that kind of thing. And it really was almost like spam towards the as we led up to the first Friday, and then all of the other First Fridays. It was almost like there was too much sharing going on. But the end result was that everyone that was sort of in the know, and there was a critical mass of folks that were all sort of in the know, that we made something happen just by kind of having an individual sort of grassroots effort to do a little bit something on one night a month. And it was teaming up local businesses who are super interested in the arts anyway with local artists, and just making those connections, or even just helping folks realize that they already know artists and their artists happen to be family members or friends. So you already have those sort of layers of connection with other people. Probably so the First Friday, just to back up, First Friday is a town-wide in Littleton event that happens during the summer, and we started it just this year, and it was super successful, and it seemed like it was waiting to happen. The timing was just right, and everything kind of hit at once, and so it's a combination of timing and those community connections. And I'm sure that Bradford is similar to the Littleton and North Country region where, you know, everyone kind of knows everybody, and, you know, for better or worse. And, you know, when someone is, you know, working on something and, you know, they're proud of it, and you give them an opportunity and people respond. So, you know, I think that's the, you know, the spirit of the First Friday events in Littleton was a lot of community support, but like a lot of those natural connections that were all helped with technology.
So Jason, I'm gonna back up a little bit now that my nerves are starting to calm down and I've taken a few sips of wine. The reason why I prompted that question is because Bradford has a long history of having townwide events, and with much success, varying success over the years. And I'm not going to claim that I know about them, you know, far into the past. I just don't know historically. But what I really wanted to hear was your perspective on the power of community buy-in to make those townwide events happen, and what does that look like in Littleton?
But I think community buy-in was really just a lot of one-on-one conversations, and, you know, leveraging relationships that are already there, or if not, you know, sort of like just walking in, introducing yourself, and, you know, explaining, you know, the general idea. We had a like a one sheet piece of paper that had, you know, kind of the outline of what we were expecting to do. We didn't really know what we were doing, actually. So, you know, I think that it's community buy-in was, a lot of it was just, you know, personal connections between people, and you get enough of those personal connections together and it builds a good head of steam.
So I just put in the chat that anyone can jump in with questions, especially on these subjects as they come up. Does anyone have anything?
So what's the venue? What's the loading dock look like? I haven't been up there.
Oh, yeah, well, the loading dock, I'm here right now. It is a very small venue. We're kind of a little bit messy right now because we're in between events, but you know, it's a very small kind of storage space. And you know, we about 7 years ago rented, and we painted a little bit and built a stage and started having bands come. It was kind of a little bit by accident, but, you know, a fun ride.
Is your First Friday music and visual art, or mostly just music at the moment?
During the summer, it was music and art. We actually had a lot of different events kind of happening concurrently at the loading dock. You know, and one of the things I think that was kind of interesting about those First Friday events was activating spaces in town that hadn't been really used at all. You know, like shutting down streets, opening them up for pedestrian traffic, and you know, the library lawn, and, you know, just finding different little nooks where, you know, people could congregate. You know, it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, just, I don't know if they know exactly what it looks like. And do you think, Jason, if you could go into explaining how town-wide this is and how it's really been embraced by all these businesses and how popular it's been? I don't know if, from what you've explained, if I could really grasp the totality of this First Friday event, and how everyone is looking at Littleton, these other towns, and how amazing and successful it's been.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a lot of it is in large part due to the Littleton Cultural Arts Commission, and, you know, the folks that were on there, on that commission, and kind of you know, our connections in the community. As far as the scale is concerned, we had about 24 local businesses or spaces in town that were activated with the arts, and connected with either local musicians or local crafts folks and makers and, you know, that sort of thing, and fine artists as well. So we had a lot of different connections and a lot of different locations. A lot of folks like actually couldn't open because of staffing issues, but you know, they were more than willing to, you know, allow folks to like be in front of their shop, you know, type of thing. You know, it was a lot of it was the first one was a little bit of a surprise. Like people were actually in town anyway, and so they got an event that they didn't know was happening. And you know, it was a little bit of word of mouth. You know, I think that you know, you can sort of scream things with marketing, but you know what really boils down to is you know, people telling other people that like, hey, something interesting is going to go on, and like actually for real communicate, as opposed to, you know, just sort of like sometimes it feels like you're just like blasting stuff out into the metaverse or whatever. But you know, I think that, you know, having those real connections was good. As far as the actual like number of people, it was very hard to quantify. I mean, we did a very rough estimate at the ending concert before the sun went down across the river. So that was another component of the First Friday events, was that at 8 o'clock, we had the beautiful Catamount mobile stage set up, and, you know, different musicians playing, you know, free concert in the evening. And we saw maybe about 200 people down there for those shows. But, you know, whether people were there for the show or came from town, it's hard to tell. But the covered bridge that connects the main part of Littleton, Main Street, with the River Glen where we had the concerts, covered bridge was like basically packed with people. Like that was a popular viewing spot, and you know, easily 20 to 50 people on the bridge at one time. So there was a lot of traffic, a lot of movement, but you know, hard to like really quantify that type of thing because there's multiple entry points all throughout town.
Jen, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay off video because my internet connection's unstable. So I'm curious about Littleton and actually any of the other communities that Jody and Geoffrey are here to talk about too. Are there any, I can type this and put it in the chat too, because it's two-part, it may be, but are there any specific ways that your communities were able to kind of cue business owners and other people with other interests into the potential benefits of the creative economy in order to get support for events like First Friday? And also, you know, on the backside of that, after First Friday, was there any sort of more obvious, I guess, evidence from that has been heard from the community and from special interests within the communities to get a sense that the community is understanding the value of your creative economies? And I know we haven't necessarily defined that yet tonight either, but yeah, just it can be a question for later too that I can put in the chat. I guess now that I'm saying it out loud, it's maybe premature, but it just had me thinking about it related to all these details about Littleton. So thank you.
Yeah, and my apologies for kind of falling into the conversation due to nerves, but creative economy, I'm going to let you, the panel, answer Jen's question, but at some point, I think we should define what creative economy is and then understand that it is not black and white. It is defined by the people who implement it. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'd be happy to jump in on a piece of this at least. So from my experience, the work that goes into having communities embrace this, which I think was at the heart of Ben's question there, it is a lot of work and a lot of time. Community and economic development take a lot of time. And the work that was done in Littleton this summer followed several years of Jason and others in town, I think, working to bring the arts to the forefront. And so there was this burgeoning vibrancy that was there. And with each of those events, they were then able to amplify that a little bit more. And so the first Friday that took place, as we watched it play out over this summer, and it evolved even over the course of the summer, watching from the outside, and Jason, what he was doing there with that group in the arts culture, or council, excuse me, you know, that was the next step in a progression of a lot of work that took to get there. So all community and economic development initiatives take a lot of time. And one of the biggest things that we've found as we've done this work, and I've been doing this since the late 90s in St. Johnsbury since 2008 when I took over at Catamount, is that the creative economy and that terminology was really squishy for folks and hard to define. It was abstract. And so it was really, really important to start creating the language around it, building actual practical experiences and examples, essentially piloting, that you could then bring forward and speak to your different audiences in your community. So the conversation you're having with the business community might be very different than you're having with the medical community or the education community, even though they're embracing the same values and you're pushing forward the same end result. And so it took a lot of time and energy to do that. And I've seen that play out in multiple different communities. In St. Johnsbury, you know, that has been building over time as well. And I think, you know, the last summer, similar to Littleton, we saw a real vibrancy that we had never seen, because we had gone over a certain tipping point, but it took since 2008 to get to that tipping point. It took a lot of time. So just to add on to that, I would say what you guys have, I think that is, you know, a real advantage coming into this conversation right now is we've done a lot of work in the state of Vermont over the past 2.5 years through research, through working with outside consultants that have a lot of experience to really build the language and the data around this so you can have these conversations. And we've done that through the Vermont Creative Network. We've done that through Catamount. We started that work in the Northeast Kingdom, I think just over 2 years ago, and we did a study there, and we have a ton of data, and that's available. That work then went to the Vermont Creative Network, and during the pandemic, we had thousands of people participate, and we have now a strategic plan with a ton of information behind it that you can use in those conversations. And so I think as you guys are coming into this now with the Vermont Council on Rural Development, really going out and looking at some of those resources that have been developed over time and not trying to recreate the wheel or start from scratch, that you have a really big foundation to be able to start this at a much different level than other communities have had in the past. So I'll stop talking now, but I'm happy to answer any questions or elaborate on that if anyone has any questions.
Go ahead, Cindy. You're on mute.
I see that Littleton does have a local arts commission. Oh, by the way, I'm a local artist in Bradford. Do you guys think that it's necessary or essential for whatever community is trying to develop such a program to have a local arts council, or can it be done in the absence of that?
Jason, you can jump in with your experience on this, and then I'll also jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the Cultural Arts Commission in Littleton was started in 2017. We didn't really have much of a purpose for the first couple of years of our existence, and it really wasn't until the pandemic that we started meeting again and trying to figure out, you know, what we can do. You know, it was in the dead of winter last winter, And I think everyone was just starved for connections. And nobody seemed to mind jumping on Zoom calls. So, you know, a lot of it was, you know, the Littleton Cultural Arts Commission didn't really have much of a purpose. We kind of almost fizzled out. And it took, you know, being sort of trapped inside with nothing to do, but plan for a fun summer. So that was definitely like a big impetus for that. You know, I think that, you know, again, technology helped out, but, you know, it was kind of reestablishing connections. So, you know, definitely, like, I think it helped having an existing group that was already, you know, sort of had the formation, but we just weren't really active.
How did the commission get started?
It was a town vote, I believe. The town voted to create a Littleton Cultural Arts Commission, and we have you know, a mission and goals. I can't necessarily pull them up right now as far as you know, what they are specifically, but it is, you know, supporting the arts and supporting creative economy. We don't really use that term though. But, you know, supporting the historical aspects, things like that, is, you know, definitely one of the things we plan to do. But we're a new commission, and we're sort of like just getting our feet under us. I mean, it is interesting for me being involved in some nonprofits, and then now in a town commission. It's a bit of a different type of organization, but sort of operates the same way, where there's a board and we meet and we have minutes and agendas and stuff.
And I'll just chime in from looking at communities across both the North Country of New Hampshire and specifically the Northeast Kingdom, but really across the state. I don't know that it's necessarily a specific type of organization that leads to the success, Cindy. So, you know, narrowly defining it to an arts council, I don't know that I've seen that as the recipe for success. It's more that you have ownership. So that evolves in different communities in different ways, but that there is an entity or entities that come together, whether that's a town, a separate nonprofit. In some cases, it's private entrepreneurs that drive it. In lots of cases, it's the combination of those things. But I think the key is that there's a place for that evolution to occur. So and so if that doesn't exist right now in Bradford, that would be a key piece, is thinking about where could that live and that ownership be. And the other thing I would say is just having read through the plan that you guys came up with, and I read it from beginning to end, and the 3 top priorities, I think it's really important as you move forward with this work that you don't look at the creative economy as something separate, that rather it's something that can be applied, a lens that can be applied to all of the priorities in town. So, and we talk about this a lot as we think about it in terms of the economic community development, that the creatives are kind of the magic dust that the fertilizer that we can spread across any of these things and create vibrancy and make them better. And so as you think about the top 3 priorities that the town identified, those could be a really great start for practical applications for this creative lens, because the town is already embracing those ideas. So as you move forward with your recreation or your environmental projects, resiliency projects, can the creative lens be brought to bear in those 3 priorities where you already have town support?
I would echo that too. So before I became a brewer and owner of a small business in St. Jay, I actually worked at the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension, where I was doing community economic development work in small rural communities in the North Country as well as across the state. I was also a regional planner in the North Country and saw sort of the burgeoning early successes of Littleton, and really echo Jody in saying that it's not really about what the specific group is and what it's called or who authorized it. It really is about a core group, as Molly said, purpose, mission, people. It's about community getting together, owning up to it, and moving forward with your ideas, and using activities like the community forums that you participated in through the Vermont Council on Rural Development. I did that same work in New Hampshire. Whether or not some of those programs were successful, and we did these all over the state, the communities we found success were the ones who owned it and moved forward. A lot of them did have town support, official support, but that wasn't necessary. A lot of communities have a lot of politics and pent up age-old histories that people feel, all communities have this, that's holding them back. Well, there are ways to move forward, I feel, where the community takes ownership, where small businesses take ownership, and you create vibrancy on your own. And you may have small successes and the town may end up following you later. It's in the communities I've seen across that state, it was really the ones who just dug in their heels, put on their bootstraps, and just did it. Find that thing that you love, that thing you have a passion for, and go for it. When I decided to open a brewery, I had been talking to town after town, encouraging them to follow their passions, to do it yourself. If you want it, you do it, you get it, you go after it. If you need capital, capital will find you. There are people who have wealth in your community or are nearby with wealth. If you have an amazing idea and a passion, you can make it happen. But it just takes finding those networks, creating those networks, and creating that positive energy, that nucleus, that nexus that moves you forward. Littleton has been doing this for so long. I remember when I was writing a grant for them, well, it'd be more than probably 10 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, to revitalize the riverfront. But you go there now, and what is it? It's a vibrant, rich place, but it started somewhere, and it took a lot of volunteer energy. Bradford has so much beauty and so much energy too. And I can totally see you doing the same thing.
I should add about the Littleton Cultural Arts Commission and First Friday. The actual amount of people that were instrumental in pulling off the whole First Friday thing was actually pretty small. It was like 3 to 5 people, but like really three or 4 people. So you don't need to have a commission. You just have to have a good working relationship with 2 or 3 people, and overlapping friend groups and connections in the community. So it doesn't have to be like a full-blown commission. I would say a lot of the commission is fairly inactive, to be blunt. And and actually Jody gave me this piece of advice last summer when I was sort of bemoaning trying to get people to do stuff, and I felt like I was doing everything and getting kind of burnt out. He said, find the 1 person or 2 people that are like all in and like, willing to, work just as hard as you are, and just focus on them. Don't focus on the people that are not really helping or just sort of dragging down the whole process. And I thought that was a really good piece of advice, and I took it to heart. So thanks, Jody.
So we have a very important comment in the feed here, and I would love to put it to the panel, but also ask, well, I'll just put it to the panel and you can just jump in. But another crucial lens is inclusivity and anti-racism, which was brought up and was probably the next in line after creative economy. It had a lot of momentum. And they were identified as strong needs at VCRD this summer, and they're needed everywhere. How have your organizations, towns, dealt with those needs in your communities in the realm of fostering the creative economy?
Yeah, I can jump in here, and then Jeff and Jason, feel free to jump in at any time. But I would say the fact that that came up in these community process is amazing, and that the work that we've done, I think that's going to be critical for us moving forward, and to make sure it's actually part of the stated goals and the values right from the beginning as you start this work as a community is really important. So that lens gets applied again to everything. So it sounds like Bradford there's 3 things that have risen kind of to the top, and using the skate park or the recreational facilities as an example. If we can bring the creative lens to that, and we can bring the inclusivity lens to that specifically, we can create a proof of concept that then the community can see and see how powerful that is. So I think that if we can start by having those values clearly stated and then taking direct action by what we focus our time and our energy on, and I just used the skate park and recreational facilities as an example from your report, but in those things where the community is already embracing and moving forward based on the plan, if we can bring these lenses to those and make sure that every conversation that's part of the conversation, I think that we can, you'll be able to see some immediate results from your work. So
Jody, can you give an example of how you've seen that work, the proof of action?
Yeah, so let me put on my creative lens here, thinking about the skate park. As we activate that skate park, and we go out to raise capital, we make sure that we find funders who support what we're talking about here in terms of inclusivity, and that they're on board from the beginning. We make sure that we find partners that are from the BIPOC community, and that could bring their skills into this from an artistic standpoint, but also other, input, direct resources, anything that we could have brought to bear in that project. We do that right from the beginning. So thinking about activating a skate park, you could have artists specifically curated for what the aesthetic of that skate park look like. You can be very deliberate around your communication and your marketing around that. There can be activation within the space where perhaps that space is used and you have celebrations there as that project were to kick off, where you could celebrate different voices in your community through different art forms and different cultures. So all of a sudden that becomes a project that was identified by the members and the community members in your town, and you take something they've already identified and you take these lenses and you bring them to bear right on that project for them. So then there's proof of concept as you move forward to build upon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks for the examples of how it could work. I'm also looking for, if you have an example from within your communities of a time it has worked, just something that
I was going to say the same thing, Jen.
Yeah.
Like actual, because
proof of concept.
what we've run up against just even in the conversations of this are like almost an immediate freeze, because people are too afraid to actually utilize the creative voices in these ways. So are there examples that any of y'all can share of this actually, like how this has actually been implemented and how this has possibly worked in a very conservative white area? Would be awesome. Or if you know of other communities who have, not necessarily like trying to put y'all on the spot, like what have you done for this, but like, do we have examples of how this has actually worked in other communities in this type of a region, where this is what we're going to hit up against? Like, well, we have to just be really careful about being too clear about our voices. So, sorry to on you, Jen.
I'll speak to that from a couple of perspectives. One, as a business owner, my space is a space with my community economic background. I wanted it to be a gathering space. Of course, COVID had something to say about that. But once we opened up a little bit in the summer, I dedicated my space to being a BIPOC, to have a BIPOC gallery. So my artists who are hosted in the space will be BIPOC from the region or state. So I would welcome people from New Hampshire as well. But right now it's Harlan Mack, who's from Johnson, Vermont. He is amazing, well-renowned, and I had known him from a while back, and he got super successful. And I reached out to Jody, and there was a mutual connection that, oh yeah, you should be reaching out to Harlan Mack. And so I've been blessed with getting Harlan Mack in my space. I, as a BIPOC myself, self-identified, want to raise up BIPOC, and I feel like using what I have in my space, where I have ownership and full artistic direction over how it goes, that is what I've chosen to do. As I move forward, of course, there will be other opportunities in how I own that. Secondly, I guess through the lens of a BIPOC who participates in my community, the intersectionality. I grew up privileged in that I grew up upper middle class. I got an education. I have a Juris Doctor degree, but I'm also Asian and have experienced those things that come with that, all that baggage of racism. And in that sense, I have felt comfortable as in who I am to let my visual who I am speak out, and to not be shy when I do bring that to the public, and to know that when people see this space, it is me, and I am not a white man, brewing the beer. It's me. I am who I am. That said, I have heard from others within the BIPOC community that they don't necessarily want that. They don't necessarily want to be lifted up and to be as visual in the community as I have chosen to do. And so I think there's a lot of challenges in identifying what level, and I can, I'm going to grossly generalize, but in a lot of our communities, it is a lot of white partners who are going to be the ones who help bring these projects up. And so when I speak to my fellow BIPOC, that is always a question of how, if we do these types of projects, how outward do we want to be? And what level should we be bringing these anti-racism issues to the forefront? One particular project was where we were going to put photos in the windows during COVID of people who were BIPOC. And there was some questions of whether people would break our windows, who would pay for our windows to get fixed. Do the people want to get their faces put in a window in a very public space, as opposed to a curated gallery where people choose to go to that gallery and see these works of art? But yeah, I personally want to do what I can. I do see challenges, though, in terms of making those issues very public, especially in a very white space. I don't know if that's just from my perspective. So.
Yeah, and I can chime in with some of the strategies that we've used at Catamount Arts and that I've seen in some of the other communities. We've tried to, through the curatorial process, directly address that. One of the things that we are working on now is, rather than us as a white-led organization doing that necessarily ourselves, but trying to find partners that we can look to, which shifts the power dynamics. So we have worked directly with the Clemens Family Farm. We've been working with them to develop a series for Black performing arts in St. Johnsbury, where they're curating the series. And we have a partnership there. And we're excited about that as a model to be able to move forward. We've held different programs at Catamount over the years where we specifically create spaces for voices to be heard. And one of those programs was the Courageous Conversations program, which we've had different iterations of over the years, where we've specifically had conversations both from the standpoint of like panel conversations and community conversations, but also artists speaking about racism, speaking about inclusivity in their artwork and bringing those forward. So we've done that. And, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that we have figured it all out, but I think for us organizationally at Catamount, and what I think is really, really key, especially in the regions that we live in, is that we make it a stated priority and we have those conversations every day on an ongoing basis, and we try and bring that to the forefront as we move forward. And that's what we've been trying to do as we do this work in this region. So I don't know if that helps.
I would offer that it takes, I think the value of bringing it forward also requires the buy-in of those that will be highlighted and who may want to remain anonymous or hidden. I remember when I was working, this would be before I decided to become more extroverted, but a group of kids yelling, "Go to China, go back to China, you fucking chink," and throwing soda at me from the street while walking down a particular community. I won't say where, but that was really bad. And then having another interaction in a business where the woman specifically ignored me and acted like I wasn't there, even though I was dressed to the nines and she had helped a white woman right in front of me. There are just many instances where I felt uncomfortable, and it took me many years to actually want to show my face meaningfully in that particular community. I avoided that community. And I would just say that bringing public spaces with a hope for anti-racism, I think needs buy-in from the BIPOC community that may exist in your community.
Well, we definitely have that. And I guess, like, what I'm hearing from what y'all are saying is that no, it hasn't been successful for real. Like, it's been, people are trying to do things, and this is where we live. And I think what both Jen and I were kind of asking for was just has this worked? Where has it worked? How does that what does that actually look like, where we do have BIPOC community and we do have folks who are trying to, well, I'll just speak in I as an artist and a Black woman that, it is, it is important for us to have a voice. It's important for that to actually be like a choice. Do you want to be seen or do you not want to be seen? What does that look like if you have a voice in this community, and how does this work in something called creative economy? When this was also, again, on the books, a bunch of folks in this group watched me walk out of a whole bunch of these meetings, very clearly walk out of them because of this type of thing. So I appreciate y'all answering, and I think that we're still kind of all of us looking for how this works, where it works, how do we support this, how do we do this and keep people safe. Thank you.
I can pop in with what we've experienced in Littleton and the surrounding North Country area. Last summer was like pretty major watershed moment for a lot of people up here, and I think the reality is that our community is probably not unlike yours, where it's just divided between folks that are, accepting and try to set forth in their life in an anti-racist way, and folks that just don't even realize that they are being that way. And we had a Black Lives Matter protest in Littleton over the summer, and there were a lot of people there. There were a lot of young people. There are a lot of BIPOC people that live in the area, and it felt really good. I mean, there were a lot of storefronts that were out supporting. On the flip side, we then had a fundraiser for Black Lives Matter in at the end of the summer in Bethlehem at Reckless, and we were combining with the arts. We did like a silent auction type of thing with the arts, and all the proceeds went to BLM Nashua, I believe, was the closest one in New Hampshire. And the event was super successful. There was a scary group of people that were parked with guns like across the street in a parking lot, and that was a little unnerving, to be honest. And but we had the conviction that what we were doing was the right thing. At the loading dock, I try and I book all the events here, and the booking lens that I usually try and employ is supporting underserved communities that aren't really well represented up here. It's been a big kind of pride moving force here for me at the loading dock, and I think that we're on the right track. Part of it is just time. You have to kind of keep at it. There was a local printer that moved to town that this is actually probably a good example of combining the arts and an anti-racist message. He did a free poster printing on a risograph printer, which is really cool. You should look it up if you don't know what it is. And it's hashtag I'm an anti-racist, and actually gave it out to a lot of local businesses in Littleton and Bethlehem, and gave out these beautiful posters to really anyone that would want them. And so it encouraged folks to project that into the community. And I think that the more you can project that type of a message of inclusion, I think the further along you can kind of move the needle in that regard.
I appreciate those types of efforts, but I'll be honest, I don't think that rural America, in the experience that I've had here or in New Hampshire, is really making the mark. Putting up posters and saying Black Lives Matter are great, and giving money is nice, but I think we need a social guttural change to make things happen. That requires police reform. It requires changing the whole system that we have of white supremacy. And I understand from my perspective, the way that I can help make that change is by owning myself and putting myself out there, even though I may risk getting my window broken because I am not white, and that there are some scary people who come into my brewery. And sometimes, it's frightening to know that they probably don't like the fact that I'm the one who's brewing the beer. But to be honest, I don't know if we're doing enough, and I don't see the projects. While I see a lot of great efforts, the projects that have been started, I don't see them being as successful as I want. And I think it's going to take a real huge change in the education system and how people are brought up. And it's really challenging. And I know you can speak to that as well, that, you know, being who you are and not being white in this community, or being LGBTQ plus, or whatever is really, really tough in this community. And I see it as a mission for me personally to challenge these things and do what I can from my perspective. But I think it really takes some really heroic and rooted people to make some serious changes in your community, some really gutsy moves to make those changes. And while I can't think of any that have done it, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be, and that you could be that thing that we aspire to be. And I would totally stand behind that.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in with one last thought to directly answer your question. We have a major problem in Vermont, and I think, you know, across the country. And so I think that the creative sector, though, is a place for us, especially those of us who are working within it, to try and make that change. And I think, again, for these projects, coming back to why we're meeting tonight, I think if the voices that you guys are bringing to the table today, if you can have those be part of this from the very beginning of this effort, as it moves forward, that and then, as Jeff said, that we can get folks behind that, that's how we're going to move the needle. And I think the arts have a really important place in this, and the creative sector do, because it's so high profile, and it's a place that touches so many people, and it's a place where people convene. And so we have to be leaders in that. And I think at a statewide level, and at an organizational level, it has to be a stated priority. We also have to recognize our shortcomings with this, and we have to bring in professional help. And I know that's something that we've done too, at Catamount and with other partners, that we're looking at bringing people in who can help facilitate this conversation and help us find solutions in our community. So thank you very much for bringing it up tonight.
So I just was wondering if Ashley, if you're off mute, if you had a question or a comment. Okay, just want to make sure. So I don't want to wrap up that conversation because it's never wrapped up, but I do want to just say that, you know, as I look at my notes and it's in an outline form, you know, I think about those foundational things, and, you know, foundations they're cyclical. And right now in Bradford, we have this foundational movement that has been sparked by VCRDs coming in and talking with us and getting everyone together and talking about what the community priorities are, and then setting those goals. And what I see is three, what I don't want to see are three pillars that are standing there, and everyone's saying, well, I'm not in that field, I'm going to step away. And what we do need to see is that anti-racism lens, that creative economy lens, be applied at the very beginning, and not let the conversation leave the station without that being a priority in all three of those realms. So, and yeah, there's a shit ton of work to do, and it's never done. But it also takes so much effort. And what I have heard is, you know, and it can't be on BIPOC folks to make that effort. It needs to be on white folks who are the majority of Vermont to take that on and move those things forward. I just want to make sure that there are no lingering voices on that subject in this realm or this Zoom meeting right now before I move on to one more comment in the chat. Okay, because that ain't over. I want to go back, and folks, I don't want this to go past 8:30 because it'll get exhausting for everyone, and you're welcome to jump off whenever. Pour yourself a drink, whatever you want to do to be comfortable. But I do want to read Jared's comment in the chat. Has permitting and insurance for live performances been fairly manageable to navigate? Also, please share a little about the model for how the artists are compensated fairly and how that is funded.
I'm sure it's all super easy to explain.
Yeah, so I can tell you, you know, from the standpoint of Catamount, one of the services I think that we do bring forward is working on those permits and the insurance piece to address the first part of that question. We try and make that part of what we do. And I would think that as you think about kind of again, back to who has the ownership in this and the entities involved, it's going to be important to figure out how that gets tackled. It's a really important question. I would say that's the administrative side of pushing forward these efforts. And it's the side that nobody likes to do and often gets left out and creates problems. So that kind of technical administrative side is really important. And it's something that you're going to need to have as part of the conversation. And again, when you're looking at all volunteer organizations, from my experience, the one thing that it just comes up over and over and over again is that it's really hard to maintain the administrative piece over time with volunteers. It ebbs and flows based on the professionals who are involved and the individuals involved, but finding some sort of an entity that's more formal to help drive that forward is really important. And then in regards to the compensation, we've made a real point to make sure that all of our artists are being compensated and being paid at a market rate. And I use that term very loosely, but we've made that a real priority. It's still a big problem in our communities. And this comes back to that kind of the squishy and educating our community about the creative sector and the economic benefits. As long as the arts are considered just a nice thing to have or non-essential, then they don't get treated the same way. And so part of what is really important in this conversation in terms of the success of it that we found over the years is to try and directly tie back to the benefits. So if we know that the average concert a participant in Vermont, in addition to their ticket price, is going to spend $25 on beer, wine, gas, and food when they come into a town, then as we have a conversation about an event, we can make an economic argument for it. And we can make that something that people are aware of. And it's, by the way, in Vermont, it's 25, I think, for a Vermont audience. But if there's somebody from out of town attending, it's $50 per person that they spend on average. So that's a really compelling conversation to have. And so then it becomes that folks that are getting behind these events are doing it because they look at it from an investment standpoint, and they're doing it deliberately, not just because it's something nice in their town. And then similarly, if we go kind of sector by sector and we start thinking about that, and again, speaking to that audience, as we speak to our healthcare providers right now, there's a real mental health crisis going on in Vermont around the pandemic and isolation and depression. And we have a real role to play in that. And if we want to get those partners working with us in supporting or sponsoring our events or championing these conversations, when we walk into a room in a community forum, we need to speak to them about how can we help in that area. And there's specific language that we can use there. So kind of going again, audience by audience, kind of sector by sector in our community, and figuring out how to communicate that in order to be able to bring that value. And I think that's how you change that mentality, because we have other nonprofits, organizations that are constantly asking artists to play for free, right? Like, can't you support our organization by playing for free? And that's really, really problematic because of the precedents that it sets.
Ben had a question for you in the chat. Sorry, Jared.
I just wanted to follow up real quick. If
Mhm.
those benefits that Jody was referring to, both the the financial figures as well as how it relates to the mental health epidemic, et cetera. Is any of that actually contained in the Vermont Culture, Create Vermont Action Plan?
Yeah, if you go out and you look at some of the studies that are done there, and there's a whole bunch of information out on the Vermont Creative Network and Vermont Arts Council website, you'll find specific data that has been, that we have compiled over the last couple of years. And you can find those, the specific language. That's one of the things that the Vermont Creative Network is working on right now, and going to be using moving forward from an advocacy standpoint, is creating kind of one sheets for communities, so that as you're having those conversations, you'll have that as a resource. So that is also being worked on right now at that level. So, but there's a lot of information out there. I would encourage you to go out there. And what you can do is, when you go into those studies too, they reference databases and other studies. So you can very quickly get your hands around what we're talking about here.
And I just put the link to the Create VT action plan. And if you go to that link, you'll find some one sheets, and then you'll find the enormous plan that is well over 100 pages in PDF form. So all that information is there, and the percentages of, how many folks work in the creative sector in each zone, and all of that. Jen, did you have a further follow-up to that, or a question about specific numbers?
Nope, I'll look in the plan, thanks.
Okay. One more thing I just want to touch on with Geoffrey is, in the plan, there are, the numbers of creatives in Vermont. And your brewery and the work that you do is it is creativity, and it is considered in this plan as a creative art. So I just didn't know if you had anything to say about that in your role in the creative sector, and how it coexists with being a business owner.
Yeah, I think I'm glad that it does speak to that. And from my perspective, I see creativity and the arts in almost everything. I used to serve on the Vermont Humanities Council, and I always wondered why the arts weren't part of the humanities. Anyway, that's an argument for people to argue about over and over again. But yeah, I take my work as creative as I can. I run my brewery like a home kitchen. I'm creating new things all the time. I don't feel stuck to any one recipe or process that I use. I want the ingredients to speak for themselves. The snobby way of saying it, the terroir of the ingredients. I use a lot of local ingredients. The base of all my beers are grown in New England. And when I can source it from Vermont, and sometimes even from the town next door. But how that sort of affects me as a small business, or how do I integrate it? I feel like it's always been a part of me. I feel like the creative outlets that I have always pursued, whether I was an office jockey or not, have always been a part of me, which is why in my brewery, I hope that when you walk in, it speaks to my experience as a person, and what I want to convey in the beers that I brew, in the experience you have in the space, from the countertop to the art on the wall, to the music that I play, to the food that you enjoy that I actually don't make, but I have an embedded food vendor. I think encouraging small businesses in your community is really about finding people with passions, and cultivating that passion, whether that's through the space on Main with Monique, or through farmers markets. The food economy, as many of you may know, it's a really tough market to break into because of the margins. But if you can find the capital and partners and passion to keep it going, I think it's an invaluable piece to your community. I mean, what is the thing that we think about when we think about community? It's breaking bread. It's coming around a table. It's, for some people, having a beer, but also having wine or a non-alcoholic beverage, or just breaking bread with butter, or perhaps a vegan alternative. There are many ways to do it, but it is around food and drink. And finding ways to lift that piece up and give opportunities to folks, I think is important. I use my space as sort of a launching space. So I have an embedded food vendor who only pays me 1% of what she makes. So she has no rent. So when she makes no money, she doesn't pay me anything. And I think when there are underutilized kitchens or spaces, and you're a property owner, you have an opportunity to bring in startups to test out projects, test out ideas to see if, one, they have it in them to do this for more than a year, and at the scale that it would take, and two, to bring something cool and new to your community that won't break their bank by having to go all in on a brick and mortar space. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, in property ownership that can be cultivated to be brought to the masses, and to people who may not have those financial opportunities that some of us have been blessed with. And, you know, I could see Bradford doing that. I know a lot of other communities have that as well. In the community that I'm in, that I live in right now, there wasn't sort of a return on investment enough for a small cafe to be put in our community. So a group of folks got together and fundraised to fix up an old building, and they bring in a small business with at extremely low rent and low cost to run a cafe. And so they have a cafe that has coffee and breakfast sandwiches and lunch sandwiches. That's how they've done it, using community capital to support a small business where otherwise there would not be one. And I think there are cool ideas like that all over the place, that small rural communities like Bradford, Littleton and St. Johnsbury and others can use. And I think what I've done can also be done, whether you have a community buy-in or not. You can use, if you have that opportunity and you've been blessed with that ability to have a space, to use your underutilized space for another business. There's nothing holding you back. I'm sure it took a little bit longer to get our insurance, but you know, it can be figured out.
So I just want to summarize what I heard, and from Jeff, and forgive me, my philosophy degree is speaking and my romanticism, but what I heard and what really sunk in with me, Jeff, what you said is community begins around breaking bread and drinking a beer and having a pint, you know. And if your table isn't big enough to fit everyone, you know, get a bigger table. So if you are a property owner, if you have that privilege of being able to own some property, and there's a startup or some, you know, widen your table, bring in another chair. And that's not to say that folks in our community and other communities aren't willing to do that. I think sometimes it just doesn't occur to people that that is a possibility. And I think what it all comes down to, and forgive me if I'm putting too fine a point on this, is it comes down to it's a way of thinking, honestly, that needs to it's that person-to-person chat, like this way of thinking. So we've all been here speaking to Jody and Geoffrey and Jason, who fell off the call because his laptop died, and all of you folks that are in the room. You know, how many of us are here? What, 3 times 4 is 12. It begins with 12 people, and then it ends up being 24. So, and that's how it happens. And there's Jason coming back. I just want to hit these comments that are in the chat. And then, for Jared, from Jared to Jody and Molly. I know Catamount Arts has expanded outside of St. Johnsbury to places such as Lake Maury Resort to help stage creative events. Is your organization available to offer your expertise or otherwise collaborate with a grassroots groups such as ours for specific projects once the concepts are developed? I can speak to that and then kick it to Jody. Yes, is the short answer. I mean, at Catamount Arts, we are a nonprofit. We lift up other arts organizations through, you know, presenting, ticketing, renting our mobile stage, lending out or renting out our production crew. We work outside of the Northeast Kingdom quite a bit. We've worked in New Hampshire. We now have 2 mobile stages that one can live and operate in New Hampshire, one can live and operate in Vermont. Of course, COVID has put a damper on that a little bit, but yeah, the short answer is yes. And Jody, I'll put it to you.
Yeah, so we've actually, I think we did work with the town of Fairleigh at one point. And we're doing it all throughout Northern Vermont and New Hampshire. Anything we can do to support our entire mission with Catamount has really over the last 10 years shifted to being in a position to be able to support the communities that are throughout the entire region. So anything we can do to help your organization specifically, pick up the phone, feel free to call me. I'd be happy to have a conversation. But you have an excellent resource right in your town with Molly, who's very involved with the Vermont community, Vermont Creative Network. So you guys, you're off to such an awesome start just with the group of people that you have here. I think I would just throw out there that I think that having listened to this conversation tonight, if I could give one bit of advice, it's trying to think across sectors of your community and trying to figure out kind of allies and folks that you can bring into this conversation and build relationships with. And it takes some time, but I think rather than thinking about it just as, you know, the arts, if you put on this broader lens of creative economy and anybody who's doing creative work or who's benefiting from it, who's experiencing it in their community in terms of quality of life, all of a sudden that becomes a much bigger table, to use the metaphor. And so I think really giving some thought in the Bradford area and directly surrounding there, who are key allies that you could bring in across sectors that are not currently participating in this, and start really having these conversations about how to lift these issues up. I think that's how you're going to make some progress. That's my thought.
And just a quick note that Jen said that Catamount was fiscal sponsor for Black Voices Matter, the Spark Grant, which was an amazing event. Ashley, you have your hand up.
I do. And I apologize for jumping in so late and then being totally unaware that I was unmuted for so long and just kind of like hanging out on unmute. So I also apologize for raising my hand and asking this question right at the end of our time. And forgive me if this has already been talked about before, but one of the things that I've encountered as a creative in Addison County is that a lot of our zoning rules are so antiquated and a lot of our Shire town is Middlebury, and the charter of the town itself is antiquated and outdated to the point that I think that it's unable to grow with the town. And what's suffering is the art sector being able to kind of bring in the more modern expressions of art, and that's like public art sculptures. And I mean, in that I say that and it like coming out of my mouth as like public art sculptures being the modern form is just absolutely ridiculous. But it's been really difficult to work with the Shire town and then the smaller surrounding towns to even accept public art as a necessary thing and something that can be included in the town zoning and planning across the board. So we're being met with a lot of roadblocks in as I think it was Jeff was saying, a lot of people trying to use their properties as art and culture spaces because they are not zoned for or cannot get permitting for that type of endeavor. So I'm gonna like leave that maybe as like a jumping off topic because I know we're right at the end of time, but it's just something that's kind of been a real sticking point for artists who are also entrepreneurs trying to engage the community in an artistic way.
And if I could just hop in really quickly, because it's a great point, and this is actually, I think, where you can use these allies across sectors because they typically sit on the boards that are making these decisions. But also a really specific point is to find out, I'm not sure which county, Bradford, or which of your regional development agencies you're working with. We have NVDA up in St. Johnsbury. And we work very closely with them. And then as the town plans start to go through their process, because they go through review and updating on a regular basis, trying to make a very deliberate effort to change the language in those plans. So the regional development office usually is working with those towns to facilitate that process. And so that's a really great place to start. And I'd be happy to talk with you guys some more about that, or Ashley, if you want to reach out, you and Molly, we can have a conversation separately on that of deliberate strategy around that.
What I've done in my communities is I just said, fuck the system. I'm just going to join the planning commission and be the chair and rewrite the zoning bylaws myself, because no one shows up, and literally I probably had the most experience at the table anyway. So it's, I can talk about that shit, and who's gonna stop me? I mean, that's a shitty thing to say, but honestly, that's what's happening anyway. I mean, who wrote the codes in the beginning? A few white dudes probably wrote it, who had lots of land. So who's to say we couldn't do it ourselves? But it is, I had to bite my lip and say I'm going to join the system, become a part of the system. But since then, I've joined several boards, including Catamount Arts, which I'm trying to deconstruct now. Just kidding, Jody. The Fairbanks Museum and Planetarium, the Vermont Brewers Association just recently, just a number of boards. And while I hate joining the system, but I feel like I can make a few changes. And I think the planning boards, if you can take sitting there and being bored out of your skull for hours, you can make meaningful differences. Or if you don't want to join the system, just show up and be the nagging Nelly who just tells them how it should be because no one else is going to say anything, and they have to listen to the public there. And you offer them the things, and they kind of have to say, okay, let's consider this. Who doesn't want this? So I'm an advocate for joining leadership if you want to affect change. If you can bite your lip down and say, you know, I hate that I'm doing it, but often these small community things, no one really shows up, and the chair or those that are on the board are the ones making the difference. And a lot of them don't want to change anything because they don't have the experience to do it. But as an antiquated system, it's a way to take advantage of the system that we've been given. Because it's really hard to make those changes unless someone joins the board who can offer that new perspective. Just my 2 cents.
I'll just go ahead and volley. I really appreciate that, Jeff. I am also on Better Middlebury Partnership Board. We are working on an action plan to just kind of shake up the town zoning and planning board and commission to kind of put our latest revision of the town plan into action. And yes, I absolutely hear what you're saying, and they are very hard boards. I think one thing that I've noticed is that as the only POC on the board, there's like an added stressor, weight, whatever you want to call it. Just it feels like a bigger role to play because the royal you, I end up being the one person representing all of the BIPOC in my county or in my town. And that's not right. And also really hard to do. So I appreciate that advice. And I definitely am taking steps to just kind of be as involved and engaged in the process as I possibly can. And I would love to meet with Jody and Molly if you guys have time just to kind of talk about the process of talking with our legislative bodies on a local level about including arts as economic drivers and really showing them the hard numbers and facts that show that they need to take the arts seriously. I'll hop off there. I've really enjoyed listening to everyone's voices and opinions on this. It's so helpful. So thank you.
So looking at the time, I just dropped in a whole bunch of links into the chat. What I've done, I put my email in there, Ashley and Jody's, and then I put links to Jeff, Jason, and Jody's, their website, not personal website, but business website, and some cool articles about all of them. So I encourage you to click on those right now, open up those tabs. So you have like 6 tabs open that you can look at maybe, you know, a week from now, as I do. But I wanted to wrap this up. And what I'm hearing is that the conversation is not going to stop here. And I feel like we could have a whole other panel on what Ashley brought up here in the end. Because as Jeff said, antiquated system, if we keep perpetuating the same old system, we're going to get the same old outcome. And we will get more of what we want if we go and disrupt whatever that looks like, whatever way is the best way. And so I would like for you all, if you have time, send me feedback. I am not the expert in much of anything, but I do know how to get in touch with people who are. So I would love to set up more of these Zoom meetings where we can continue this talk and continue talking about topics that in one topic I'm thinking of is like understanding what these community development boards even do. As folks in the creative sector, if we aren't familiar with what the board is doing, how do we become more familiar so we can learn that language, you know, things like that. So I don't know if there are any final words. I want to let you all go so you can get back to your Wednesday evening. So I'm just going to end and say thank you so much to all of you who showed up tonight. And thank you so much to Jody, Jeff, and Jason, who took me up on this. I appreciate your time so much. Yeah, I think that's it, but I'll be in touch, and please be in touch with me. My email is in the chat.
Thanks so much.
Good night, everybody.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Night.